The sun was just beginning to rise over the city of Chicago, casting a golden glow on the horizon. Marcus Johnson stood at Gate 23, his boarding pass in hand, waiting patiently to board Flight 327 to Miami. At 47 years old, Marcus was a man who carried himself with quiet confidence. His tall frame and sharp features made him stand out in a crowd, but it was his piercing brown eyes that told the story of a life filled with challenges and victories. Though he had retired from his days as an elite pilot in the U.S. Air Force, his military training still ran deep within him. He wasn't someone who sought attention, but if trouble came knocking, he knew how to handle it. Marcus adjusted the strap of his leather bag and glanced at his watch. It was 7:45 a.m., and the flight was scheduled to depart in 15 minutes. Around him, passengers bustled about, some sipping coffee, others scrolling through their phones, and a few chatting animatedly about vacations or business meetings ahead. The atmosphere was calm and routine, just like any other morning at O'Hare International Airport. Little did anyone know this day would be anything but ordinary. As Marcus stepped onto the plane, he chose a window seat near the middle of the aircraft. He liked having a view of the sky during takeoff. It reminded him of his younger days flying fighter jets for the Air Force. Settling into his seat, he placed his bag under the chair in front of him and buckled up. Outside, ground crew members moved efficiently, preparing the plane for departure. Inside, flight attendants greeted passengers with practiced smiles, offering assistance where needed. Children giggled as they played with toys, and couples exchanged soft words of affection. For all intents and purposes, this was shaping up to be a normal flight. But normalcy has a way of shattering without warning. About 20 minutes after takeoff, when the plane had reached cruising altitude, everything changed in an instant. A loud crash echoed through the cabin as 5 masked men burst through the galley doors, shouting orders at the top of their lungs. "Everyone stay seated. Nobody move," one of them barked, brandishing a handgun. Passengers froze, their faces pale with shock. Some instinctively raised their hands while others clutched their loved ones tightly, unsure of what to do next. Panic rippled through the cabin like a wave. A woman screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. A child began to cry, his tiny hands gripping his mother's arm. Bags were shoved aside as people scrambled to obey the hijackers' commands. One of the masked men stormed down the aisle, yanking open overhead compartments and tossing luggage onto the floor. Another stood near the cockpit door, guarding it. Fiercely, his weapon pointed directly at the pilots inside. Chaos reigned supreme. Amidst the commotion, Marcus remained eerily still. His heart pounded in his chest, but his expression betrayed no emotion. Years of discipline taught him that panic only clouded judgment. And right now, clarity was crucial. Slowly, he scanned the scene unfolding around him, taking note of every detail. There were 5 hijackers in total, each wearing black ski masks, and carrying weapons ranging from handguns to knives. Their movements suggested they weren't amateurs. They worked quickly, communicating in short, clipped sentences. Whoever these men were, they had planned this operation carefully. One of the hijackers approached the cockpit, banging on the reinforced door. "Open up," he demanded, his voice laced with urgency. After a tense moment, the door cracked open, slightly, and the leader slipped inside, leaving the rest of his team to manage the passengers. From his seat, Marcus could hear muffled voices coming from the cockpit. The hijacker was ordering the pilots to change course, though the exact destination remained unclear. Whatever their plan was, it didn't bode well for the passengers aboard Flight 327. While the hijackers focused on asserting control, Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He thought back to his days in the Air Force, flying missions over hostile territories and navigating dangerous skies. Those experiences had shaped him into the man he was today, a man who thrived under pressure. As much as he wanted to intervene, immediately, he knew acting impulsively could put innocent lives at risk. Instead, he decided to wait, observing the hijackers' behavior and identifying potential weaknesses. For now, Marcus played along, keeping his head down and blending in with the terrified passengers. But beneath his calm exterior, his mind raced with possibilities. Who were these men? What did they want? And most importantly, how could he stop them before things escalated further? These questions swirled in his head as he watched the hijackers rifle through passengers' belongings, searching for valuables. One of them snatched a gold necklace from an elderly woman, causing her to whimper softly. Another argued with a businessman over a designer watch, their voices rising in anger. Despite the fear gripping everyone else, Marcus felt a strange sense of focus wash over him. This wasn't the first time he'd faced danger, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. His training had prepared him for moments like this, to remain composed when others faltered, to think strategically when chaos reigned. And though the hijackers believed they were in control, Marcus knew better. They had underestimated him. They had no idea who they were dealing with. As the hijackers continued their rampage, Marcus quietly formulated a plan. He couldn't act yet, not until he understood their strategy fully, but he was ready. Ready to protect the frightened passengers around him. Ready to reclaim the plane. Ready to show these criminals that they had picked the wrong flight to hijack. Unbeknownst to the masked men, the real battle was just beginning. The chaos in the cabin began to settle, but only slightly. Passengers sat rigid in their seats, too afraid to move or speak. Some stared blankly ahead, their minds racing with worst-case scenarios, while others clung to each other for comfort. The hijackers moved with purpose, their actions sharp and deliberate. They weren't there to cause random destruction. They had a plan, and it was becoming clearer by the minute. One of the masked men stood near the cockpit door, his weapon, trained on anyone who dared look his way. His eyes darted back and forth, scanning the passengers like a predator sizing up its prey. Another hijacker roamed the aisles, collecting wallets, phones, and jewelry from terrified travelers. "Empty your pockets," he shouted, his voice harsh and commanding. People complied without hesitation, tossing their belongings into a large duffel bag he carried. A young woman hesitated when he demanded her engagement ring, tears streaming down her face. Without warning, the hijacker grabbed her wrist and twisted it until she cried out in pain. Marcus flinched at the sound, his fists tightening involuntarily. He wanted to intervene to stop the abuse, but he forced himself to stay calm. Acting prematurely could make things worse. Meanwhile, the leader of the group remained inside the cockpit, issuing orders to the pilots. From where Marcus sat, he could hear fragments of their conversation. "Change course now," the leader barked. "Head southeast." The pilots protested weakly, explaining that diverting mid-flight would require clearance from air traffic control. The hijacker wasn't interested in excuses. "Do it, or I'll kill you both," he snarled. There was no room for negotiation. Whatever the hijackers were planning, they meant business. As the minutes ticked by, Marcus continued to observe every detail. He noticed subtle cracks in the hijackers' facade, signs of stress and uncertainty beneath their bravado. One of them, a wiry man with restless eyes, kept glancing toward the cockpit as if expecting something to go wrong. Another seemed distracted, arguing loudly with a passenger over a piece of jewelry. Marcus filed these observations away, knowing that even the smallest weakness could be exploited later. These men might have weapons, but they weren't invincible. They were human, just like everyone else on the plane, and humans made mistakes. Back. In the cockpit, the tension was palpable. The leader leaned over the pilot's shoulders, scrutinizing the controls. "How long until we reach the destination?" he asked sharply. The co-pilot hesitated before answering. "About 3 hours, depending on weather conditions." The leader muttered something under his breath, clearly frustrated. Marcus guessed they were heading to a remote airstrip somewhere, a location far enough from major cities to avoid detection, but close enough to execute their plan efficiently. It was a tactic used by criminals in the past, and it made sense given the circumstances. Outside the cockpit, the mood among the passengers grew increasingly grim. A mother tried to soothe her crying child, whispering reassurances despite her own fear. An elderly man gripped the armrests of his seat, his knuckles white with anxiety. Others sat in stunned silence, their thoughts consumed by questions they couldn't answer. Would they survive this ordeal? Where were they being taken? What did the hijackers want with them? Marcus knew the answers wouldn't come easily, but he refused to give in to despair. Instead, he focused on gathering information. He listened intently to the hijackers' conversations, piecing together clues about their intentions. At one point, he overheard two of them discussing a drop-off and a team waiting on the ground. This confirmed his suspicion. They weren't planning to harm the passengers outright. Their goal was likely ransom money or some form of exchange. If that was true, then time was on their side. The longer they stayed airborne, the more opportunities. Marcus would have to turn the situation around. Despite the danger surrounding him, Marcus felt a spark of determination ignite within him. He remembered the countless drills and simulations he'd endured during his time in the Air Force. In those moments, he had learned to think several steps ahead, anticipating threats before they materialized. Now, decades later, those skills were coming back to him in full force. He visualized potential scenarios, weighing the risks and rewards of each course of action. Could he overpower one of the hijackers quietly and take his weapon? Or should he wait for a more opportune moment, when their guard was down? While Marcus plotted his next move, the hijackers became more aggressive. One of them shoved a teenage boy back into his seat after catching him reaching for his phone. "No calls," he snapped, waving his gun menacingly. Another hijacker confiscated a man's laptop, smashing it against the floor to ensure it couldn't be used. Fear hung heavy in the air, suffocating and relentless. Yet through it all, Marcus remained composed. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed. To anyone watching, he appeared just another frightened passenger. But inside, his mind was working. Over time, strategizing ways to regain control of the situation. Suddenly, the leader emerged from the cockpit, his presence commanding immediate attention. He strode down the aisle, stopping midway to address the passengers. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "We are changing course. Do exactly as we say and no one will get hurt. Resist us and you'll regret it." His words sent a fresh wave of terror through the cabin. Babies whimpered, and adults exchanged fearful glances. Marcus locked eyes with the leader briefly, studying him closely. There was something calculating about the man, something that set him apart from the others. He wasn't just a thug. He was the mastermind behind this operation. And if Marcus hoped to stop them, he would need to neutralize him first. After delivering his ominous warning, the leader returned to the cockpit, leaving the remaining hijackers to patrol the cabin. Marcus seized the opportunity to shift positions subtly, moving closer to the aisle. He needed a better vantage point, one that allowed him to act quickly when the time came. As he adjusted his seatbelt, he caught sight of a young flight attendant, hiding behind a curtain near the galley. Her eyes met his for a fleeting second, wide with panic. Marcus gave her a slight nod, hoping to convey reassurance. She looked away quickly, trembling visibly. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second dragging on like an eternity. The plane rocked gently as it navigated through patches of turbulence, adding to the unease. Outside, the sky darkened slightly, hinting at an approaching storm. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with dread. Passengers whispered prayers under their breath, clinging to whatever shred of hope they could muster. For many, Marcus included, faith was the only thing keeping them grounded. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, Marcus felt a growing sense of resolve. He had faced danger before, and he had always found a way to prevail. This time would be no different. These hijackers had chosen the wrong man to cross. They thought they were in charge, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Marcus Johnson wasn't just another passenger. He was a former Air Force pilot, a soldier trained to protect and defend. And soon enough, they would learn exactly what that meant. For now, though, he waited. Patience was key. Timing was everything. And Marcus knew that when the moment arrived, he would be ready. The hijackers' grip on the plane seemed unshakable, but Marcus knew that appearances could be deceiving. Beneath their masks and weapons lay vulnerabilities, small cracks in their armor that he could exploit if he acted wisely. The key was finding the right moment to strike, a window of opportunity where the risk outweighed the reward. For now, Marcus stayed patient, his mind working tirelessly as he observed every move the hijackers made. One of the younger hijackers caught Marcus's attention. He looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone to challenge him. His hands trembled slightly as he held his weapon, betraying a lack of confidence. This was the kind of weakness Marcus had been waiting for, a chink in the chain that could break under pressure. But he couldn't afford to rush. Any misstep could cost lives, including his own. So Marcus bided his time, watching and waiting. As the plane cruised through the sky, the leader re-emerged from the cockpit, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Check everyone again," he ordered his men. "Make sure no one has anything hidden." The hijackers began patrolling the aisles once more, searching passengers' bags and pockets with renewed vigor. Marcus kept his head down, pretending to comply as one of them approached him. The man rifled through Marcus's leather bag carelessly, tossing it aside when he found nothing of value. Satisfied, he moved on to the next row. Marcus exhaled slowly, his heart pounding but steady. Now was not the time to act. Not yet. But as the hijacker turned his back, Marcus noticed something crucial. The man's gun holster wasn't secured properly. It hung loosely at his side, within reach if Marcus could close the distance fast enough. An idea formed in his mind, risky but feasible. If he could disarm this hijacker quietly, he might gain an advantage without alarming the others. Minutes passed agonizingly slow, each second stretching longer than the last. Finally, the young hijacker paused near Marcus's row, distracted by a passenger who accidentally dropped her purse. As the hijacker bent down to retrieve it, Marcus saw his chance. Moving with precision honed by years of military training, Marcus leaned forward and grabbed the hijacker's wrist, twisting it sharply. The gun clattered to the floor as the man cried out in pain. Before he could react further, Marcus delivered a swift blow to the side of his head, knocking him unconscious. Pandemonium erupted instantly. Passengers gasped, and nearby hijackers spun around, their weapons raised. Thinking quickly, Marcus dragged the unconscious man into an empty row of seats and shoved him onto the floor. He stripped off the hijacker's mask and jacket, pulling them on himself in seconds. The disguise was crude but effective enough to buy him some time. With the stolen weapon tucked into his waistband, Marcus straightened up and stepped back. Into the aisle, his posture confident and commanding. The other hijackers hesitated, unsure what had happened. "What's going on?" one of them demanded, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he mimicked the hijackers' earlier behavior, barking orders at the passengers. "Stay seated. Don't move." His deep, authoritative voice masked any hint of hesitation. To the untrained eye, he appeared to be just another member of the gang, satisfied that his ruse had worked. For now, Marcus began moving toward the cockpit. The closer he got, the more critical his mission became. Neutralizing the leader was essential. Without him, the rest of the hijackers would lose direction. But reaching the cockpit wouldn't be easy. One of the remaining hijackers stood guard outside the door, his weapon trained on anyone who came too close. Marcus slowed his pace, calculating his approach carefully. When he reached the guard, Marcus stopped a few feet away, pretending to adjust his mask. "Leader wants you inside," he said gruffly, gesturing toward the cockpit. The guard frowned, clearly skeptical. "Why?" he asked, his grip tightening on his gun. Marcus shrugged dismissively. "How should I know? Just go." For a moment, it seemed like the guard might refuse. Then, after a brief hesitation, he nodded and stepped toward the cockpit door. As soon as the guard disappeared inside, Marcus sprang into action. He slipped past the open door and positioned himself against the wall, listening intently to the voices within. The leader was speaking urgently, his tone sharp and impatient. Marcus tightened his grip on the stolen weapon, mentally rehearsing his next move. He knew he had only seconds before the guard realized something was wrong and alerted the others. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pushed open the cockpit door and stepped inside. The scene unfolded in an instant. The leader spun around, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized Marcus. The guard beside him froze, his hand hovering near his holster. Marcus didn't give them a chance to react. Raising the gun, he pointed it directly at the leader. "Drop your weapons," he commanded, his voice calm but firm. "Now." The leader hesitated, his gaze flickering between Marcus and the gun. "Who are you?" he spat, trying to maintain control of the situation. Marcus ignored the question, his focus unwavering. "I said drop your weapons or I'll shoot." His tone left no room for argument. Slowly, reluctantly, the leader lowered his gun to the floor. The guard followed suit, his hands trembling as he placed his weapon down. With the immediate threat neutralized, Marcus turned his attention to the pilots. Both men sat rigid in their seats, their faces pale with fear. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, his voice softer now. They nodded silently, too shaken to speak. Marcus glanced at the controls, noting the plane's current trajectory. "We need to contact air traffic control," he said firmly. "Tell them we've been hijacked and request clearance for an emergency landing." The co-pilot nodded quickly, reaching for the radio. Meanwhile, Marcus kept his gun trained on the leader and the guard, ensuring they didn't try anything reckless. Outside the cockpit, the remaining hijackers were beginning to grow suspicious. Muffled shouts echoed through the cabin as they demanded answers. Marcus knew he couldn't delay much longer. Every second counted. "Listen to me," Marcus said, addressing the leader. "Your plan is over. Surrender peacefully or things will get worse for all of us." The leader clenched his jaw, his frustration evident. But Marcus could see the resignation in his eyes. He knew he'd been beaten. After a long pause, he muttered a curse under his breath and raised his hands in surrender. The guard followed suit, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Marcus allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though he remained vigilant. The hardest part was far from over. They still had to land the plane safely. Turning back to the pilots, he gave them a reassuring nod. "You're doing great," he said. "Just keep us steady." Then, stepping out of the cockpit, Marcus addressed the remaining hijackers. "It's over," he announced, his voice carrying authority. "Put down your weapons or I'll take you out myself." For a moment, the hijackers hesitated, their expressions a mix of confusion and disbelief. But seeing the determination in Marcus's eyes and realizing their leader had already surrendered, they complied. One by one, they dropped their weapons and raised their hands. Passengers watched in stunned silence, their fear giving way to cautious hope. Some whispered prayers of gratitude, while others simply stared in awe at the man who had single-handedly turned the tide. Back in the cockpit, Marcus took stock of the situation. The hijackers were subdued, the passengers were safe, for now, and the plane was still airborne. But the journey wasn't over yet. Landing a commercial airliner required skill and precision, qualities Marcus hadn't practiced in years. Yet as he stood there, surrounded by chaos, he felt a familiar sense of purpose wash over him. This was what he was trained for: to protect, to lead, to persevere even when the odds seemed insurmountable. With renewed resolve, Marcus turned his attention to the task ahead. The storm clouds outside loomed ominously, promising turbulence and challenges. But Marcus didn't flinch. He had faced storms before, both literal and metaphorical, and he had always come out on top. Today would be no exception. As the plane descended toward its destination, Marcus prepared himself for the final leg of this harrowing ordeal. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready. The hijackers were subdued, their weapons scattered across the floor like discarded tools of destruction. Passengers sat frozen in their seats, watching with wide eyes as Marcus stood tall in the aisle, his stolen weapon still raised. The tension in the cabin was palpable, but for the first time since the ordeal began, there was a glimmer of hope. Marcus knew this moment was fragile. Hope could shatter just as quickly as it had formed if he didn't act decisively. "Everyone stay calm," Marcus said loudly, his voice cutting through the silence. "We're taking back control of this plane." His words carried authority, and though they couldn't see his face beneath the mask, His presence alone inspired trust. One by one, passengers nodded, some mouthing silent prayers of gratitude. Marcus turned to the nearest flight attendant, who had been hiding behind a curtain earlier. "Help me secure these men," he instructed, gesturing toward the hijackers. She hesitated only briefly before nodding and rushing to gather zip ties from the galley. With the hijackers restrained and separated from each other, Marcus moved back toward the cockpit. The pilots were visibly shaken, but cooperative, their hands trembling as they adjusted the controls. "What's our status?" Marcus asked, leaning over their shoulders to examine the instruments. The co-pilot glanced up nervously. "We've deviated significantly from our original route. There's turbulence ahead and fuel levels are lower than ideal." Marcus processed the information quickly. Landing safely wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. "Can you radio air traffic control?" he asked. The pilot nodded and reached for the communication panel. Static crackled through the speakers before a voice responded on the other end. "Flight 327, we've lost contact with your aircraft. Please confirm your position." "This is Marcus Johnson, a former U.S. Air Force pilot," Marcus replied, speaking clearly into the mic. "Our plane has been hijacked. The situation is under control now, but we need immediate clearance for an emergency landing. We're currently flying southeast and encountering adverse weather conditions." There was a pause on the other end, followed by rapid instructions. Ground crews scrambled to prepare for the incoming flight, rerouting airspace and alerting emergency services. Back in the cabin, passengers whispered among themselves, piecing together what little they knew about their savior. A businessman leaned over to his seatmate and muttered, "Did you hear him? He's a former Air Force pilot." The news spread quietly, sparking a mixture of awe and relief. Children stopped crying and adults exchanged hopeful glances. For the first time in hours, the atmosphere shifted. Not entirely calm, but no, longer suffocating with fear. Meanwhile, Marcus focused intently on the task at hand. He directed the pilots to stabilize the aircraft, while keeping an eye on the restrained hijackers. Outside, storm clouds gathered ominously, lightning flashing intermittently in the distance. Turbulence rocked the plane, causing passengers to grip their armrests tightly. "Hold on," Marcus called out, his tone reassuring despite the chaos. "We're doing everything we can to get us down safely." Inside the cockpit, the pilots worked tirelessly, guided by Marcus's steady hand. Though years had passed since he last operated such a large aircraft, muscle memory kicked in. He studied the controls, recalling procedures drilled into him during his military days. "Lower the flaps gradually," he instructed the co-pilot. "We need to slow down without stalling." The co-pilot complied, sweat dripping down his forehead as he adjusted the settings. Together, they navigated the turbulent skies, inching closer to solid ground. As the plane descended, Marcus communicated frequently with air traffic control, providing updates on their progress. "We're approximately 20 minutes from touchdown," he reported. "Weather conditions are worsening, so we'll need maximum assistance on the runway." On the ground, emergency vehicles lined up along the tarmac, their flashing lights visible even from high above. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cars stood ready, prepared for any outcome. Back in the cabin, passengers braced themselves for landing. Mothers held their children close, whispering words of comfort. Strangers clasped hands, united by shared fear and faith. Marcus walked through the aisles, offering reassurance wherever he could. "We're almost there," he told them, his voice firm, yet gentle. "Stay strong. We're going to make it." His words sparked courage in those who heard them, bolstering their resolve during the final stretch. The descent grew rougher as the plane fought against strong winds. Alarms blared intermittently, warning of system malfunctions caused by earlier stress. Marcus remained unfazed, his training teaching him to prioritize critical tasks over distractions. "Focus on altitude," he reminded the pilots. "Keep the nose level. We're almost home." The co-pilot nodded, his movements precise despite his nerves. Beside him, the captain gripped the yoke tightly, his knuckles white with determination. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, The runway came into view. Rain lashed against the windshield as the plane approached, its wheels groaning under the strain of impending impact. "Here we go," Marcus said softly, gripping the edge of the console. With a jolt, the wheels touched down, skidding slightly before finding traction. Passengers gasped collectively, their bodies jolted by the force of the landing. But the plane stayed upright, rolling steadily toward the designated stop point. Cheers erupted from the cabin as reality sank in. They had survived. Tears streamed down faces, relief washing over everyone like a tidal wave. Children hugged their parents and strangers embraced, overwhelmed by emotion. Marcus exhaled deeply, allowing himself a brief moment of triumph. It wasn't over yet. They still needed to evacuate, but the hardest part was behind them. Outside, emergency teams swarmed the aircraft, ensuring everyone disembarked safely. Hijackers were led away in handcuffs, their heads bowed in defeat. Reporters gathered on the perimeter of the runway, cameras flashing as they captured images of the heroic landing. Inside the plane, passengers lingered in the aisles, reluctant to leave until they'd personally thanked the man who saved them. A woman approached Marcus, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved my family today." Others joined her, forming a line of people eager to express their appreciation. Marcus accepted their thanks humbly, shaking hands and nodding silently. Despite the praise, he remained grounded, knowing that his actions stemmed not from a desire for recognition but from a sense of duty. When authorities finally boarded the plane, they immediately sought out Marcus. Officers questioned him about the hijacking, taking detailed notes as he recounted the events. Word of his bravery spread quickly, reaching news outlets within minutes. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to learn more about the retired Air Force pilot who had thwarted a hijacking mid-flight. Marcus agreed to speak briefly, emphasizing the importance of teamwork and resilience. "We got through this because we worked together," he told the reporters, his tone measured and sincere. "I may have taken the lead, but every passenger played a role in staying calm and trusting the process. That's what made the difference." His words resonated deeply, earning admiration from viewers across the country. As the day drew to a close, Marcus stepped off the plane and onto solid ground, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over him. Yet beneath the fatigue lay a profound sense of fulfillment. He had faced danger head-on and emerged victorious, not for glory but because it was the right thing to do. In that moment, Marcus realized something important. Heroes aren't defined by extraordinary abilities or grand gestures. They're ordinary people who rise to meet extraordinary challenges, and sometimes that's enough to change lives forever. The plane finally came to a stop on the rain-slicked runway, its engines whining as they powered down. For a moment there was silence, no cheers, no cries, just the sound of heavy rain pelting the fuselage and the distant hum of emergency vehicles surrounding the aircraft. Passengers sat frozen in their seats, too stunned to move. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a storm cloud. They were alive. Against all odds, they had survived. Marcus stood near the cockpit door, his hands resting on the back of a seat for support. His legs felt weak, not from physical exhaustion but from the emotional toll of the past few hours. He glanced around the cabin, taking in the faces of the passengers. Some were crying quietly, others praying, and a few simply stared ahead, their expressions blank with disbelief. It was a mix of emotions, raw and unfiltered, yet one thing united them all: gratitude. Their eyes kept drifting toward Marcus, the man who had turned despair into hope. Emergency personnel rushed aboard, shouting instructions to evacuate quickly. "Please remain calm. Exit via the nearest door," they called out, guiding people toward the exits. Passengers grabbed their belongings, or what little they had left after the hijackers' rampage, and shuffled toward the aisles. Children clung to their parents, and elderly passengers leaned on strangers for support. The evacuation was chaotic, but orderly, thanks in part to Marcus's earlier reassurances. As people filed out, Marcus lingered behind, ensuring everyone made it off safely. He checked under seats and inside lavatories, making sure no one was left behind. When he reached the rear of the plane, he spotted a young boy sitting alone, clutching a stuffed animal tightly. The boy looked up at Marcus, his wide eyes filled with fear. "It's okay," Marcus said softly, crouching down to his level. "We're safe now. Let's go find your family." The boy nodded hesitantly, allowing Marcus to take his hand and lead him toward the exit. Outside, the scene was surreal. Emergency lights flashed in every direction, casting eerie shadows on the wet tarmac. Firefighters and paramedics stood ready, though thankfully, no one appeared to be seriously injured. Passengers huddled together under umbrellas provided by ground staff, shivering from both the cold rain and the lingering adrenaline rush. Reporters jostled for position behind barricades, microphones and cameras pointed eagerly at the disembarking survivors. Marcus stepped off the plane last, his boots splashing through puddles as he descended the stairs. A cheer erupted from the crowd gathered nearby, passengers, rescue workers, and even some airport employees who had witnessed the dramatic landing. Marcus raised a hand slightly, acknowledging the applause but clearly uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. His actions had been driven by instinct, not a desire for recognition. Authorities approached him immediately, asking for details about the hijacking and how he managed to regain control of the aircraft. Marcus answered their questions patiently, recounting the events step by step. He described the hijackers' plan, their weaknesses, and the split-second decisions that led to their capture. His account was concise and factual, devoid of embellishment or self-praise. Yet those listening couldn't help but marvel at his composure and resourcefulness under such extreme pressure. Word of Marcus's heroics spread rapidly. Within hours, news outlets across the country aired reports of the harrowing ordeal aboard Flight 327. Headlines blared phrases like, "Former Air Force pilot saves 150 lives," and "Unlikely hero thwarts mid-air hijacking." Social media lit up with praise for Marcus, with hashtags like iconic real-life hero trending nationwide. Strangers shared stories of courage and resilience inspired by his actions, while passengers from the flight posted heartfelt messages of gratitude online. Despite the growing public interest, Marcus remained humble. During a brief press conference held at the airport, he addressed reporters with quiet dignity. "I didn't do anything special," he insisted, his voice steady. "I did what anyone else would have done in my position. I protected my fellow passengers." His words resonated deeply, earning him even more admiration. People saw in him not just a hero but a symbol of humanity at its best. Selfless, brave, and unwavering in the face of danger. Meanwhile, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the hijackers' motives. Evidence suggested they had planned to divert the plane to a remote airstrip where accomplices awaited them. Once there, they intended to hold passengers hostage until a ransom was paid. It was a chilling scenario, one that could have ended in tragedy if not for Marcus's intervention. Authorities praised his quick thinking, crediting him with preventing what could have been a catastrophic outcome. Back among the passengers, bonds formed quickly. Strangers who had shared unimaginable terror became friends overnight, united by their shared experience. Many exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch. Some even organized an impromptu gathering at a nearby hotel lobby, where they recounted moments from the flight and toasted to their survival. Marcus joined them briefly, accepting hugs and handshakes graciously. Though he preferred solitude, he understood the importance of closure, for himself and for the others. That evening, as Marcus returned to his hotel room, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the city skyline glowing faintly in the distance. Memories of his days in the Air Force flooded back, the camaraderie, the missions, the sacrifices. He had thought those days were behind him, relegated to the past. But today proved otherwise. Today reminded him that bravery wasn't something you left behind when you retired. It was ingrained in who you were, ready to surface when needed most. Exhaustion finally caught up with him, and Marcus lay down, closing his eyes. Sleep didn't come easily. Images of the hijacking replayed in his mind, each frame vivid and haunting. Yet amidst the chaos, one thought brought him peace. He had made a difference. Not just for the passengers on Flight 327, but for their families, their communities, and countless others who might draw strength from his story. In a world often overshadowed by darkness, Marcus had shone a light, a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up. The next morning, Marcus woke early, eager to return home to Miami. As he packed his bag, he noticed a small envelope slipped under his door. Opening it, he found a handwritten note signed by dozens of passengers from the flight. "Thank you for saving our lives," it read. "You are our hero, whether you believe it or not." Tears welled up in his eyes as he folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. For all his humility, Marcus knew this gesture meant more than any headline or award ever could. At the airport, reporters swarmed him again, desperate for follow-up interviews. Marcus politely declined, explaining that he wanted to focus on healing and moving forward. As he boarded his connecting flight, passengers applauded him once more, their gratitude evident in every clap and smile. Marcus nodded in acknowledgement, his heart full but his demeanor unchanged. He was just a man doing his duty, a quiet hero who had risen to the occasion when it mattered most. The plane took off smoothly, ascending into the clear blue sky. Marcus gazed out the window, watching as clouds drifted lazily below. Life, he realized, was unpredictable. One moment, you're living an ordinary existence. The next, you're thrust into extraordinary circumstances. What mattered most wasn't the challenges you faced, but how you responded to them. And Marcus had responded with courage, determination, and grace. As the miles stretched between him and the ordeal, Marcus felt a sense of peace wash over him. He didn't need accolades or fame. He already had everything he needed: a purpose, fulfilled, lives saved, and memories that would forever remind him of the power of resilience. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he could face it head-on, just as he had done aboard Flight 327. Because heroes aren't born, they're made, shaped, by the choices they make in moments of crisis. And Marcus Johnson had proven himself to be nothing less than a true hero. When Marcus finally arrived in Miami, the city greeted him with open arms, or at least that's how it felt. News of his bravery had traveled far and wide, and by the time he stepped off the plane, a small crowd had gathered to welcome him home. There were family members who hadn't seen him in days, friends eager to hug him tightly, and even strangers holding signs that read, "Thank you, Marcus." The outpouring of love and gratitude overwhelmed him. He wasn't used to being celebrated. Humility was part of his nature. But as people cheered and clapped, Marcus couldn't help but feel a deep sense of connection to humanity, to purpose, and to something greater than himself. Reporters continued to chase after him, desperate for interviews and sound bites. Marcus handled their questions with the same calm demeanor he'd shown throughout the ordeal. He spoke plainly, without pretense or exaggeration. "I'm no hero," he told them repeatedly. "I just did what needed to be done." Yet the public disagreed. To them, Marcus was more than a man. He was a symbol of hope, proof that courage could triumph over fear. His story resonated deeply, inspiring countless others to believe in the power of resilience and selflessness. In the weeks that followed, Marcus became a household name. Television networks aired specials about his life, delving into his past as an Air Force pilot and highlighting the skills that had saved Flight 327. Magazines featured him on their covers, calling him the unlikely hero who changed everything. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about his bravery, though always respectfully. Despite the attention, Marcus remained grounded. Fame wasn't what motivated him. It never had been. What mattered most was knowing he'd made a difference. Passengers from the flight formed a support group, meeting regularly to process the trauma they'd endured together. They called themselves the 327 survivors, a name chosen not because it sounded dramatic but because it represented unity. Each member brought something unique to the table: strength, humor, empathy, and they leaned on one another during tough times. Marcus stayed in touch with several of them, attending meetings whenever possible and offering words of encouragement when needed. For many, he was more than a savior. He was a friend who understood exactly what they were going through. One passenger, Sarah Thompson, stood out among the group. She was a single mother traveling with her young son when the hijacking occurred. During the chaos, she had shielded her child from harm, whispering reassurances despite her own terror. Afterward, she credited Marcus with giving her family a second chance at life. "If it weren't for you," she told him during one meeting, tears streaming down her face, "my son wouldn't have a future. How do you thank someone for that?" Marcus simply smiled and replied, "By living your best life. That's all the thanks I need." As the months passed, Marcus found new ways to channel his energy. He began volunteering with organizations dedicated to helping victims of violence and trauma. Whether speaking at community events or mentoring individuals struggling to heal, he poured his heart into making a positive impact. His military training had taught him discipline and leadership, qualities he now used to empower others. Friends often remarked that Marcus seemed happier than ever before, as if saving Flight 327 had reignited a spark within him. The hijackers' trial dominated headlines for weeks, shedding light on their motives and connections. Investigators revealed that the group had ties to organized crime, planning to use the passengers as leverage in a larger scheme. Thanks to Marcus's quick thinking, however, their plan had unraveled completely. When sentenced, the hijackers received lengthy prison terms, ensuring they would never threaten anyone again. Justice had been served, but Marcus didn't dwell on it. Revenge wasn't his goal. He cared only about protecting innocent lives. Despite the accolades and recognition, Marcus never lost sight of who he was. He continued working as a consultant for aviation safety firms, using his expertise to improve protocols and prevent similar incidents in the future. His colleagues admired his dedication, often joking that he should write a book about his experiences. Marcus laughed off the suggestion, insisting his story belonged to everyone aboard Flight 327, not just him. Still, he occasionally jotted down notes, documenting lessons learned and moments that stood out. Perhaps someday, he thought, those notes might inspire others facing adversity. Life eventually settled into a rhythm for Marcus, though reminders of the hijacking lingered. Strangers approached him in grocery stores or coffee shops, thanking him for his bravery. Children asked for autographs, their eyes wide with admiration, and every so often he received letters from people across the country sharing how his actions had inspired them to overcome challenges in their own lives. These gestures touched him deeply, reinforcing his belief in the goodness of people. One evening, as Marcus sat on his porch watching the sunset, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sarah Thompson, inviting him to her son's birthday party. Attached was a photo of the boy blowing out candles on a cake shaped like an airplane. Marcus chuckled softly, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. In that moment, he realized something profound. Heroes aren't defined by grand acts of valor alone. They're remembered for the ripples they create, the lives they touch, the hope they restore, and the legacy they leave behind. Marcus attended the party, bringing along a gift wrapped in blue paper adorned with tiny planes. The boy squealed with delight when he opened it, a model aircraft signed by Marcus himself. As the child hugged him tightly, Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. This was why he had fought so hard aboard Flight 327, not for fame or glory, but for moments like this. Moments filled with joy, connection, and the promise of brighter tomorrows. Looking back, Marcus knew he'd been fortunate. Not everyone gets a second chance at life, let alone an opportunity to make such a meaningful impact. But he also knew that luck played only a small role in his success. Preparation, determination, and faith in humanity had carried him through. Those qualities weren't unique to him. They resided within everyone, waiting to be tapped into when the moment arose. Years Later, when asked about his experience aboard Flight 327, Marcus summed it up simply. It taught me that we're stronger together. No matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward, if we have the courage to take it. His words echoed far beyond the confines of any interview or article, reaching hearts and minds around the world. Because in the end, Marcus, Johnson wasn't just a hero. He was a reminder that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to give up, and that, perhaps, was his greatest legacy of all.